So Cardinal Vincent, Little Amal has just left the cathedral after a really wonderful and quite unique service. Can you tell us about how it felt to welcome her here today?
Well, it's very strange actually, because half of me says, come on, this is a puppet. And half of me found myself speaking to her. So there's something very creative in what we saw this afternoon. It wasn't just a puppet, though it was, but it kind of embodies a whole dimension of our human family that is travelling lost, at risk and danger, and yet still with that kind of innocence that you would expect of a young child. So I think there was a strong emotional presence and a pull that somehow, in her gestures particularly, I think was expressed. I think that touched everybody this afternoon, actually.
Definitely, and it's of course one part of an 8,000 kilometre journey that started on the Turkey-Syria border right back in July and has come through towns and cities taking part in hundreds of events. Why is it so important that the church was part of that journey?
Well, I think what was very fortunate, helpful, opportune was the fact that she could come into the church. And as I said at the beginning, we're welcoming you to the home of our hearts. It is here that we gather to speak from our hearts to the God who made us and who loves us and who wants us to thrive and be at our best. So the fact that she could come in, and then the second thing was that a wonderful cross-section of people who were here, children especially, but from so many different nationalities. And I could say, no matter where we come from, here we find a welcome. And we want to extend that to you as well. And then there was just, in 15 minutes, a mini pilgrimage. A pilgrimage in the footsteps of St. Paul. A pilgrimage to the Lady Chapel. Now, this is a figure that represents children who've been separated from one another. So to come to the Lady Chapel, was to discover a motherhood of a different dimension that is never broken and never closed and never lost. And I hope that speaks very eloquently to the heart. And then, of course, back to the sanctuary and to the singing of those two lovely choirs, but also to be there at the place of where we celebrate the death and resurrection of Jesus. And then I think those two little presents at the end, a guardian angel and a birthday card, just perfect.
It was a really beautiful moment. And you mentioned the number of people in the cathedral today from so many different backgrounds. And of course, there's been thousands of other people taking part in the other events and will be over the next few days and weeks. And other people listening to this, watching the events online. What would be the message you'd want them to really take away from this journey?
Well, it's not complicated, but it's difficult to practice. The message is very simple. That people who are desperate for almost whatever reason, but certainly from violence or from persecution or from absolute poverty, they're our brothers and sisters. That's the message. And as Christians in them, we are invited to see the person of Jesus. And we just have to let that rumble around our hearts and our minds and our conscience and say, can we not do better for these brothers and sisters of ours?
And finally, just picking up on that point about our brothers and sisters, you personally have encountered a lot of people who, like Amal, have been forced to flee their homes, both here in England and Wales and also on your own trips to the Middle East as well as other places. Were there any particular encounters or moments that you recalled today when you were visited by Amal, when you were welcoming her here?
Well, I think the one that springs to mind most quickly was in Erbil, and it was not long after the aggressive takeover of Mosul and the fleeing of 120,000 people from the town of Mosul, and many of them were welcomed by the church in Erbil. And I remember standing outside this container which had become this woman's home, and she talked about her Muslim neighbours and how they had wept for each other at their sudden parting, and how she actually said to me, in many ways, I'd rather be here, even in this container as my home, than living in Mosul under ISIS. And she said, my heart goes out to the one I've left behind. So here was a woman who was hanging on, but still had room in her heart for others. She wasn't full of self-pity at all.
And I think that's a message for all of us about the humanity and lived experience of people who've been forced to flee. Thank you so much for those reflections today.
Pleasure. Thank you.